Okay. Well, first, good afternoon. Glad to see you all here. Now, I have a question for you because this was something I was doing on Thursday at work. Does Thursday mean anything to you? Well, there's Hanukkah, but there's something else. Now, I'm a veteran, that's a hint, because it has to do with December 7th. Pearl Harbor Day. I asked several people. They didn't know. It wasn't even on my calendar. So that's what I was thinking. What's going on here? You know, and one person told me, said, well, they don't teach that in high school anymore. They don't teach that in history. So I'm sitting here, it's one of the most important days in our history that took us into World War II. I always remembered, I know vets know about it, that was always on the calendar and everybody always knew what it was, as well as they did D-Day. So that was kind of stunning, and that was kind of what led to this, observing the times. Because there are things going on that a lot of people aren't even aware of. They're not even paying attention. So if you all would turn to 2 Timothy 3:1, where he states, you should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times. Now, the one thing I kind of want you to keep in your mind as I go through this is the definition of difficult. It says, characterize or causing hardship or problems. What I want you to kind of keep in the back of your mind is hardship. So let's begin at the turn of the century, when the 21st century came into being. What did we kind of start out with? 9/11. And then in 2008, you had an economic downturn, which pretty much shut down the construction industry. And one of the things that were going on there, like especially in my profession, jurisdictions were shutting down their building departments. We were gone. We didn't have jobs anymore. And it was a struggle for about 4 years. And then all of a sudden, third-party building officials and so forth came on the scene. Jurisdictions were were hiring, and that was working out well. And then when things picked up again, they wanted to put their departments together. But there was a problem. A lot of us building officials and inspectors retired. A lot of them left the state. So there was a shortage there. So was that kind of a hardship or a problem for jurisdictions? It certainly was, as well as the public. And then in 2016, everybody knows what was going on there. The election, Hillary Clinton, Trump, Donald Trump, and all that trouble and all the things that brought about. It was not good. And then what spurred from that, because Donald Trump did win the election, you had the problems with riots in the cities, BLM, Antifa, and you had the mainstream media saying when the street, the city's on fire behind them. And said, oh, this is a peaceful riot. Remember all of that? Troubles, the lying, problems that creates, and hardship, especially for those people in those cities where those riots were going on. Now let's come to 2020. We'll start, of course, what happened there was COVID, a global pandemic, and hardship, problems. I have to tell you something. My older brother and my mother died in 2020. Actually, my older brother died December 29th, 2019, but you might as well call it 2020. My mother was with me for the last 5 years of her life. Of course, she was in a nursing home. She was healthy, but her short-term memory wasn't there, and she was kind of going in decline. And I told the people at the nursing home, I said, you have to understand about my mother and her family. They die at 92. And she was right on schedule. I said, they're very healthy people, but they go into decline quickly. I mean, my mother was limber. She had great hearing, better than mine, great teeth, eyesight. I mean, and her family was very, very healthy. That's why I gave them the warning. Well, during COVID, you had what? Lockdowns. Nursing homes, hospitals had strict rules and everything, but the nursing home that my mother was in, lockdown. I could not see her. They just simply would not allow it, just as you see up here, you know, people with viscing between them and everything that was going on. Then 2 o'clock in the morning one evening, I got a phone call where they informed me that my mother was dying. She was in the process. I'm going, I want to see my mother. I mean, I had to really get kind of militant, combatant about it, and they finally said, okay. So when I get there, what do? You take the temperature, we do this. They got me all gowned out and the whole thing, and they let me in the building. Of course, COVID was already there because the staff brought it in. So I was able to spend that afternoon with my mother. Of course, she was in hospice care and with the morphine and everything. She could hear me and kind of respond. But I spent that afternoon with her, and I thank the nursing home for allowing that, because guess what happened? Went home, you know, it's evening time. Guess what call I get at 2 o'clock in the morning? Your mother has passed away. What my point is here, that was a great hardship for me, because what was left of the family was my mother and I. The rest were gone, dead and buried. And I really struggled with that, because I firmly believe there was a period of time that I could not see my mother, and she wasn't tech savvy because they were doing the kind of video conferencing kind of thing. I kind of looked at it, and I could be very, very wrong here, but I think because she was cut off from me, that it sped up her death. Of course, realizing she was already 91, and her birthday was in November, she was approaching 92. And I knew, okay, she's going to go. But it was at that period of time, and the stress that it caused me was beyond limits. And I know I wasn't the only one. There were other family members who could not see their loved ones because of COVID and the restrictions that went on with it. And then following that, you had the vaccination. The vaccination craziness. I mean, it bothered me. As I watched this whole thing, you know, it wasn't really a proven vaccine. And they said it doesn't stop the disease. It kind of relieves things. But what was bothering me, what I saw happening in hospitals, what I saw happening in the military. They were throwing these people out of service, out of their jobs, because they refused to take the vaccine. So you have medical people ranks being reduced. You have military ranks being reduced. And then of course, I know there were businesses, if you weren't vaccinated, you couldn't come in. You had to have some sort of proof, and especially in the travel. That was causing hardship. That was creating a lot of problems for a lot of people. And we were going through this. And then, of course, of this downturns, lockdowns, the vaccination things, it had an effect on the economy. Our economy took a downturn. And I don't think it's actually fully recovered. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, we might have had a little relief under the Trump administration, but look where we're at now. It's not good, and I don't expect it to get any better. And of course, when the 2020 election came, what was going on in this country? All of a sudden, you become very much aware of a very deep political divide. Probably to the point that there's no return. There's no healing this wound that's in this nation. It is still going on. And then, of course, we have an approaching election 2024. That's going to be interesting. It really is. So as we move into 2021, what happened on January 6th? I'm sure you all remember that. Anybody not remember what happened on January 6th, the riots at the Capitol? Now, that was kind of, to me, was a disturbing event, such as 9/11, that we were hit hard. We were hit in a spot that should never been hit. All of a sudden in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, I'm not one to call it an insurrection, but it was definitely a riot. But it was happening at our Capitol, kind of leaving that hidden message that God had with 9/11, kind of saying the same thing here. There's a problem. And of course, it drove that political divide in this country even deeper. You know, and that's what reminds me when Christ said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. So in this scene, you're kind of seeing this happening in the background. There's a problem here. You know, the 21st century, things changed. They did in mind. They became more common. They became more intense. And in some eyes, there's symbolism there. There is with mine that there's trouble. The United States is in trouble, that our decline is becoming obvious. And then I had the next one, which is the Surfside condo collapse. I think you all remember that, Surfside. I watched that whole thing, you know, and being in the construction industry and the administrative side, the structural flaw. And I started thinking, well, what happened? 98 people died there. Now, with those families, you can understand the stress, the hardship, and the problems that resulted from that, because people became very nervous and very anxious in the sense that in the older condominiums that are down in South Florida, they are of this age. What are the structural flaws? Because there really wasn't any kind of annual inspection being done on these condos. Now, all of a sudden, there is. You know, it took deaths to do that. Well, if you owned a unit in one of these older condominiums, would that cause you any stress? Will that cause you any hardship? You may have a loved one there. You may have a financial investment in realizing this thing may come down to the ground. You know, it's just one of those things that are occurring in this country that speaks there are problems, and they're deadly problems. Just kind of adding to, okay, we got these things going on here. And Kentucky, Mayfield, Kentucky. Some of you may know about what happened in Mayfield, Kentucky. It was a tornado that literally leveled the town. But this isn't the only example, because there's hurricanes. We had hurricanes with high destruction. We had flooding with high destruction. So all of a sudden, we're seeing these weather events that have an intensity to it. It's killing people. It's destroying towns. Hardship. I think about the families. I think about all this destruction and why. And I think we do understand why, because if you study the blessings and the cursings and you really start looking at the cursings and what they mean, and you know who they're for, it's right here in front of you. The violence, all of it. Natural destruction. There are people that are not paying attention to this. Oh, we've had this before. It's no big deal. But to us, it has a meaning. There are things that we are watching. We are watching this intensification and frequency of these disasters. But the one that impressed me the most, empty shelves in the grocery stores. That was stunning. I mean, I'm sitting here. I would go to Walmart, nothing on the paper shelf, paper goods, nothing. And other things. And what happened to that blessing? That we wouldn't have to worry about foods, that there would be supply and in abundance. And we had that. COVID kind of taught us something a little different, didn't it? That it can happen. Hardship, did it create hardships for some? I remember the baby formula. Remember young families with babies not having formula? That was catastrophic. Wasn't good. I mean, these are signs that are taking place. And my question is, are you aware of it or are you ignoring it? I think you need to kind of realize what's going on there. 2022. Uvalde, Texas. Y'all remember that one? Where 19 students were shot, 2 teachers, and I think there were 2 deaths. But what is it showing here? These mass shootings in schools and in other places. But I can't understand why children are being attacked. Doesn't make sense, does it? And you look at what was the hardship for these families? The insecurity, the problem that brings. Now, I am afraid to send my kid to school because they may not survive. I may get a phone call and said, I'm sorry. Strange things that have not happened before, but there were many. It wasn't as this one. There were many, and currently we have one at University Nevada in Las Vegas. It had some shootings, but there's more. There was Sandy Hook. There's a trend that's going on here. Doesn't that tell you something? Where's that blessing? Why is this curse among us? And we need to ask that question. But with the mainstream media and people, they ask the question, but they don't know the answer. They don't know why. It's these guns that are killing people. It's not the guns, it's the person that has his hand on the gun. They don't realize the societal decay on what's going on. Something for us to watch. Something for us to be aware of. Because when my wife and I go out with our daughter and her husband, we think about where we're going. And you sit down in the restaurant, we want to make sure we know how to get out of there fast. So we're not too far from that door. Because we don't trust what's going on. I mean, you look at 95. Look how treacherous that's becoming. You know, I'm amazed at the recklessness that goes on. It was never that way before. Why is it now? It's the way people are thinking. They don't care. They don't care about putting other people's life in danger. That's what's troubling. I mean, the last couple of times I've been coming up here and going back home, there were some close calls. It wasn't that I was being a jerk out there. Cars drifting towards me, not realizing, and then this squeezing, you know, you got a car here saying squeezing in between 2 cars when there's really not enough space. And if they ever clip you, guess what happens? They're out of control, and so do they really care? No. Sign of the times? Yes. Does it create problems? Yes. You have to be careful out there. You really do, because we've come to that time. And then another event that happened in this year, of course, which is the overturning of Roe v. Wade with the Supreme Court, caused a lot of problems throughout the nation. States started passing laws and things of that nature. The only thing that bothers me, and I'm saying this, and it's me saying it, I don't support it. You know, there might be some unique cases where, but I see it as a taking of a life. And I read in the news this morning, I think it's the state of Missouri. Missouri saying any woman that has an abortion, they're going to charge them with murder. But it's the 2 parties. You've got the pro-life and you've got the pro-choice. And it's a deep divide. And I know it's a sensitive subject. I know you've got to be careful about what you say. But the loss of an innocent life bothers me. And I think it's something a nation needs to consider on how God looks at that. And then they wonder why they have the hardships they do. They wonder why they have the problems they do. But you know, I look, where is it, with James or Stevens, and with Christ, and he says, forgive them for they know not what they do. That comes into my mind. And I think about that. Yes, that is true. They don't know what they're doing because they don't have a godly sense in their life. They have no respect for what God stands for. It's sad, but that's what's leading us into these things. And then another event that's taking place, Russia invades Ukraine. That's an ongoing war. It's destructive. Cities are being destroyed. Lives are being lost. Hardship. Problems. If you were a Ukrainian, that would be a nightmare place to be. But the things that I've read have said that war did not have to happen. That Zelensky could have respected Russia and its concerns, its security concerns. But something happened that turned him from that. And we see the results of it today. And now it's getting to be a political problem because the counteroffensive failed, and now the money's beginning to dry up. Europe's tired of it. United States is growing tired of it. They're kind of now pushing him towards a peace negotiation with Russia. Why didn't you do it in the first place? You destroyed a nation. People have died. You've probably lost a couple of generations. For what? Hardship, problems for that country. And who knows how that will actually end. We will see. And then we come to 2023, and you had something going on. That's the current war between Israel and Hamas. What happened in Israel, what Hamas did, is inexcusable. I don't care what anybody says. They have no excuse. But what's unfortunate is the way that Hamas has buried itself in Gaza. And I watch the news and I see that destruction. You know, like Ukraine. The death. The hardships that this is causing. The problems. And it's a global problem. You know, these things are intensifying. That's what my point is. Yes, we've seen these wars before. We've been through 2 world wars and the destruction in Europe and all that. But they're changing. They're more intense than they ever used to be before. Observing these things. Well, I can still sleep at night. You know, I just understand these things and see it for what it is. But I think about Christ's return and when he talked about the way that these things are going to be. And I'm paying attention to it. And there's a lot of people that don't. And then, of course, following, you still have the Ukraine war continuing. Will there be peace negotiations with Russia? I hope so. I hope they come to a resolution there and they can start putting that nation back together, that the death will finally stop. We know and understand that when Christ returns, you won't have this anymore. But we have it amongst us today. And it's horrifying. It's hard to see. Because I think of Lot when he grieved at the unrighteousness, the things he was seeing. And as we see these things ourselves today, do we not grieve? Do we not? This should not be. But we have that hope. Like I mentioned, when Christ returns, this goes away. This won't occur anymore. And that's definitely a day to look for. And then, of course, in the next one, there were floodings. I mean, we're back to natural disasters again. There were floodings, there's, the hurricanes, the droughts, but the one thing that really caught my attention was what happened in Hawaii. Town is Lahaina, I believe, burnt to the ground. These are terrible events. And in California, look what goes on with the wildfires out in California. I think there are a couple of towns that disappeared, part of the power grid collapsed and all this. But the point is, they're getting worse. They're getting intense. Does not God warn you that he takes you through steps like we've seen starting with 9/11? There's steps that are being taken, and they're gradually getting worse and more intense. Observing the times, knowing and understanding what you're seeing and how it plays in God's plan and what is taking place here. I just wish people understood. Like I said, it disturbs me a lot last week about December 7th. That upset me. It really did. To forget something like that, because 2,400 sailors died when that event happened, but it took us into a war with Japan, the Pacific War, which was pretty bloody. A lot of life was lost. And there was the one thing, I think, the death march. I don't know if you ever read about that or understand it, is where, I forget, Bataan, the Bataan, where American prisoners of war were put on this march. A lot of them died. Sad things, terrible things. We don't want to see these things. In 2024, now, I want to kind of talk to you about something. It's something that's interesting. It's something that is beneath the radar. Because I read an article on a news site that it was a former member of the European Parliament. Treaty reform, the EU treaty reforms. Everything that man said in his article has happened so far, even right down to the vote. It's now in what they call convention, or what we would call committee, because it's going to be voted on. It's about the typical things, agriculture, energy, things of that. But the one thing that is underneath it all is the changing of a unanimous vote. For anything to become law in the EU, all the member nations have to vote on it. If one votes against it, it doesn't happen. And of course, you're seeing that with Hungary. Hungary is constantly bringing it down. They want to reform this treaty to a majority vote. Ooh, what does that mean? And according to this guy, it's the big boys. And he said, like Germany, France, Italy, he said, they'll get their way. Now, the one thing we understand about Europe, the clay and iron, they're fractional. So if they get this done beneath the scenes, which this member of parliament, retired member of parliament mentioned, what do you think is going to take place in Europe? Because these nations are going to say, you have stripped us of our sovereignty. It's going to be trouble. So just thinking theoretically, okay, if this gets in place, all this trouble starts in Europe, there's going to be some nations that's going to support that. And they're not going to change. So if some of these other nations decide to exit from the EU, where do you think we're going to end up there? Is there something working with prophecy there? I mean, it's something to watch this year, possibly into 2025, because also in 24 there's elections, European elections. And if you know anything about Geert Wilder, that's the European Trump. Europe is now moving over to a conservative thought. Conservative because they're tired of the immigration issue. They're saying they're destroying our culture. So they're swinging the other way. So they're getting angry like our country is about the immigration and the other issues that are going on with Ukraine and so forth. That may help to pass that law or that reform, would it not? That's underneath the radar. That's not in the news. It just all of a sudden happens. Could that lead to a prophetic event? You won't know unless you're watching it. Because you have to dig these things out. I mean, I find our mainstream media a disgrace. They don't even know what's going on. They just do whatever. And you have to go to other sites to dig it out, which I do. And that's just me. I watch. But of course, there's two watches. There's the events, current events, and then there's your spiritual self. That's the one you really got to be careful of. But you kind of have to know what's going on, because you still have the Israeli-Hamas war. That's going to go on for a while. I don't see that changing anytime soon. Israel is bound and determined to destroy Hamas. I believe they will do everything to accomplish that goal. I don't think they're going to let the UN stop them. But it's the destruction, because Hamas is buried deep into that. And then, of course, with the Ukrainian war that is still going on, it's kind of winter's coming and winter affects the military operations. The question is about the failure of the counteroffensive. Where do you go now? Your military equipment is destroyed. You have horrendous losses where the military is basically on the verge of mutiny. You're in a very bad spot there. So it's going to, I hope there is, that they resolve that issue, but I don't know. We'll have to see, because Russia's going to play hardball. They're not going to give up the land that they have taken. And that's one of the main issues. Hopefully, for the Ukrainians, I hope it does end, as well as what's going on in Gaza. It's just heart-wrenching. The deadliness of it, the deaths. And who knows about the hostages? My wife and I talk about what's going to happen to them. We don't even know if they're alive. And the question comes up that the hostages that are left are female. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I hear in the news. And then, of course, you've got all sorts, comments on that. I don't know that for sure, but that's what our mainstream media is saying. When you hear things like that, what does that do? That raises passion. That raises anger in people because of what's happening to these women. That's a main issue. Because people with moral sense, they'll want revenge. These crimes border war crimes. They do. But at this, what's going on, the politics have the guts and the will to follow through on that? Probably not. We'll have to wait and see. Then, of course, I think we're looking at some very serious economic problems that will probably really show itself in 24. Inflation's not going away. And you listen to the jobs report, this report, that report, and then what do? A month or two later? They revise them. They revise them down. I don't trust our media. They lie. They don't want you to know what's really going on. I think there are some serious things, because I read things about, I just read this morning, as a matter of fact, with Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates, about not using the petrodollar anymore. And because that involves BRICS. Well, what do you think supports our debt? The petrodollar. We have the reserve currency, which gives us the ability to print funny money and so forth. But with BRICS, if they quit using the dollar, that's a leg that's knocked out. if they quit using the petrodollar. That's another leg that's knocked out. And you should say, okay, if these nations do this and we're no longer the world currency, what does that mean for us?
Very bad.
Very bad. Your standard of living is going to shrink. You don't think that won't cause hardship? You don't think that won't cause problems? If you're not ready for it, if you do not understand it, it's going to be pretty traumatic for you. My wife and I, we talk about it. Say, well, we know it's coming. So, I mean, there are some things we've done to kind of get us through a few months and so forth, but we know it. So when it happens, we know why. Is that not part of the cursings? There's so much in those blessings and cursings that you need to be very, very much aware of it. These things are coming. And if you're not watching or paying attention, it's going to catch you off guard. And I think we have a responsibility because God is telling us these things. He doesn't want us to be obsessed with it. Because that obsession can interfere with your spiritual life. Your spiritual life is number one. You have to watch yourself. You have to understand where you stand with God and be honest with yourself. But he's also, so be aware. Be aware of these things that are going on in the world around you and where they're leading. Because we go to Luke 21, verse 9. It says, when you hear of wars and insurrections, don't panic. Yes, these things must take place first, but the end won't follow immediately. So I look at, okay, where are we at today? In the Middle East, in the Red Sea, Houthi rebels are doing what? They're shooting at American military ships and cargo ships. Matter of fact, I think they took possession of one. The United States is getting slowly drawn into a possible attack on the Houthi, or whatever it is, rebels. That's going to draw us into a war with who? Saudi Arabia. But Iran would have its hand into it too, and Iraq. And what is going on in Iraq right now? Our military bases are being attacked. Matter of fact, I think there was a resolution in the House to withdraw our troops from Syria. Of course, it didn't go anywhere. But why are we being attacked? You know, and we have to be very, very careful what's going on in the Red Sea at the Straits of Hormuz. That's a passage, and it's a narrow one. That military action is beginning there, and we're in the middle of it. Not to mention Taiwan. I think everybody knows China's going to do it. It's just a matter of when. And, you know, we're doing all this saber rattling. Well, if you do that, we're going to attack and so forth. And then we realize that the Chinese Navy out has more ships than we do. They have advanced weaponry. You know, then there's this rumor out there that eventually we're going to be in a war with Russia. You got to be kidding me. To the top nuclear powers, and you would be a fool to think that Russia wouldn't use that weaponry. If they see they're disappearing or losing, they're going to use it, just as the United States will. China has nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons. They're threatening South Korea. Japan now is taking the move to build their military nuclear. So you see what's developing here? You're seeing these Asian powers rising up. You're seeing these nations that once didn't want to go to war or even prepare for it are now preparing for it. They're building their militaries. They're going with advanced weaponry and nuclear weaponry. Does that mean anything to you? Do you think about it? Do you understand? There's something going on here. Because if you fully understand prophecy, you're going to recognize what you're seeing here. And then now there's this AI thing. And I forget which nation it is that really wants to advance their AI into military. What movie do you think of when you hear that? Terminator. Those robots, the AI robots and the whole thing. My wife always says, she says, if you see this in science fiction movies, TVs, she says, it will happen. Are we approaching that? Some of this stuff you read in Revelations about describing some of this weaponry, could it not involve AI? I think it can. Because I've always wondered myself, what's the advancement in military weaponry in the end time? These things that you read and see, what could it be? I mean, we understand the warfare now, but is it going to change? Is AI going to be very much involved in this? Something to think about. Because what nations are really going to advance it? I think it's going to be your Asian nations, especially China. And who is really, really skilled in AI? Japan. They're way ahead in that. They really are. So it's just something to think, but like it says here, don't panic. No need to panic. And then moving on to Luke 21, verses 10 through 11. That then he added, nations will go to war against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. We're seeing it. It's been going on for the last 5,000, 6,000 years, but it's different. We're in modern times. There's different weaponry. There's different weapons of mass destruction. We're talking high-scale death. Scary. But one of the things, and continually says, there would be great earthquakes. I looked up some stats last night just out of curiosity. In the last 365 days, there had been 51,371 earthquakes. Now, they're small, but I think there were a couple of nations in the Pacific that had 7.8 or something like that in the Indonesian. There's bigger ones. I think Turkey had one that there was deaths involved. But when you think about 51,000 earthquakes, but they're going to intensify. They're going to probably be on land where there will be death and destruction. You see it here and there, but it kind of sounds like it's going to get a little worse. And then it says there will be famines and plagues in many lands. Well, yeah, that's going on. And it said there will be terrifying things and great miraculous signs from heaven. I'm not talking UFOs. I don't consider that a miraculous sign or anybody else. But what it kind of refers back to is Revelation 6, verses 12 through 14. I don't have a slide on that. And if you turn there, it reads, I watched as the Lamb broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake. The sun became as dark as black cloth, and the moon became as red as blood. And the stars of the sky fell from the earth like green figs falling from a tree shaken by a strong wind. The sky rolled up like a scroll, and all the mountains and islands were moved from their places. I thought about the sky rolled up like a scroll. There's sometimes these storms that come in, and you look at the clouds, and they're bubbled down, and you can kind of see the rolling. It's kind of like a scroll. And I know there's certain conditions with clouds where they'll be in a line and they roll. But this is something different than it, and it obviously results from an earthquake. That's pretty serious, where it darkens the sky and all sorts of things like that. And I think that's probably what it's referring to. But then I asked myself a question. What kind of guide do I have? What should I kind of be focusing on to really understand what's coming? And I started in Revelation 6, verse 2, where it said, I looked up and saw a white horse standing there. Its rider carried a bow, and a crown was placed on his head, and he rode out to win many battles, gain the victory. False religion. There's many religions in this world, is there not? But I'm kind of more focused on traditional Christianity. Because especially during now, you have these holidays, has nothing to do with Christ. The pagan origins that have been infused, and it's dominant. We're not. Because we have an incident, like at work, the lunch table discussions, you know how that works. So someone asked me, we know what days you keep. He says, and the question was, why do you keep Jewish holidays? And I said, I don't keep Jewish holidays. You've seen the look on their face. I said, because, yeah, that really got it. I said, let's go back to Deuteronomy. I think it's chapter 16, where the Lord said to Moses, these are my appointed days. And that's what I told him. I said, these are the days I keep. They're God's appointed days. They're not the Jewish appointed days. I said, the Jews obey the law. They keep God's holy days, just as I do. So don't sit there and tell me I'm a Jew and I keep Jewish holidays, because I do not. I keep God's days. I obey him. Has nothing to do with all this other stuff. And they just kind of look at me, you know, like, but you know, they respect it. My supervisor actually knows the days I keep. Because she'll say to me, oh, you're going to be keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. I went, oh, yes. You know, and she understands. I've actually explained it to her, but she's Catholic, but you know, yeah, she's got her days and things like that. But she listens, and she knows why the days that I'm not there, why. So it's kind of a interesting thing, but that's kind of based on that white horse. So I'm saying, okay, I'm looking for these issues too. And then you move on to, then another horse appeared, a red one. The rider was given a mighty sword and the authority to take peace from the earth. And there was war and slaughter everywhere. What do you see in Gaza? What do you see in the Ukraine? And there's other wars out there that the news really doesn't talk about. The slaughter, when I look at Ukraine and what's going on in Gaza, the red horse. Look for those kind of things, Jeff. Where are these wars? Pay attention. And then moving on to Revelation 6, verses 5 through 6, it says, when the Lamb broke the third seal, I heard the third living being saying, come. I looked up and saw a black horse. And its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hands. And I heard a voice from among the four living beings saying, a loaf of bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's pay. And don't waste the olive oil and wine. What caught my attention? A loaf of wheat bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's pay. Are we not facing that? With this inflation? Could it get to that point where the Weimar Republic, they took 1,000,000 marks to buy a loaf of bread? Is this coming our way? So I pay attention to this black horse, saying, okay, where are these problems? And right now, I'm looking at what's happening in the U.S. economy. The inflation, the petrodollar being dropped, the American dollar being dropped as a reserve currency, which translates into your standard of living taking a dive. Is that what it's going to be? A loaf of bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's pay? Yeah, you know, I see people struggling today. You can't even buy a new vehicle. You know, I was in the market to buy a new vehicle, but I had to drop out because of the interest rate, and people are paying anywhere from $800 to $1,000 a month for a new vehicle. I walked away. I told them, my business budget is $450 a month for a vehicle. If I can't do it, I'm not going to do it, I'm walking away. And I did that. I think it kind of shocked the salesman, but I told them up front, this is the way it is. And it was a Ford Maverick I was going to buy. I liked it. And, the cost, was the mid-20s. And then when he showed me what I had to pay, got up and left. So I think about, because in Okeechobee is not a wealthy community. It's an agricultural community. And I wonder, how are these people doing this? How can they? You got rents that are running $1,800 a month. Car payments $1,000. How can you do it? Does the black horse talk to you? I think it does. There's more to watch in 24 to see what happens here. And then moving on to Revelation 6:8. I looked up and saw a horse whose color was pale green. The rider's name was Death, and his companion was the grave. And these two were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword, and famine and disease and wild animals. I think that's more of a future thing, but I've heard in the news where animals are now attacking people. Coyotes, panthers. You're beginning to see that. And then like in these zoos, there's been a couple deaths where the zookeeper, apparently, one got eaten up by a Bengal tiger. He was walking around with a shoe in his mouth. And then they went in there and found the body. But it's happened in other places as well. But war. War has devastating effects, especially like in Ethiopia. Because what are the end results of war? What follows war? Famine. Death. Hardships. It's deadly. That's the result of war. And God's laying this out here. So it's kind of, and like I look at COVID. COVID killed what? A lot of people globally. It's kind of like, okay, pay attention to what the green horse or the pale horse is all about. I look for, okay, where is this applied? What's going on in our world that points to this pale horse? Because to me, this is God's outline telling us, here's your outline, watch for these things, which I'm doing. Sometimes a little excessive, but I'm doing it. And then in Luke 21, verse 36, it says, keep alert at all times and pray that you might be strong enough to escape these coming horrors and stand before the Son of Man. That's the spiritual side of it. Because these things are depressing. I get angry at times, and I feel that groan that Lot has, what he's seen, what was going on. You can't let it dominate you. You can't let it distract you to a point where you ignore the things of God. That you cannot do. He just says to you, be aware of it. But the key to me is the faith and the understanding and knowing when Jesus Christ returns, this ends. I want to be there. I want to be part of that. And that's what God is saying here. Stay alert, Jeff. And pray that you may be strong enough to whatever you see and go through, that you do not lose your crown. It's the thing of being part of the solution. That is our goal. That is what we live for. I want to see those days where all of this ends. And I know in my heart you do too. But we also know what we have to do to get there. Because if you neglect that, you may not be there. And you spend a lifetime serving God, you can make a mistake. So that's why I would caution, be careful, don't let these things become obsessive and overrule you. And then following in Mark 13, verse 35, it says, you too must keep watch. For you don't know when the master of the household will return. In the evening, at midnight, before dawn, or at daybreak? We don't know the time when Christ will return. I know there's people out there that predict it and try and guess it, but we have an understanding of markers along the way. When you start seeing certain things, it's moving this way. It's getting a little closer, but we still don't know the day and hour. We just understand the events. And when you start seeing certain events, such as like I was talking about Europe and the EU treaty reforms, there's something there that if that actually happens, you're going to see a totally different Europe. A marker, if it happens. If it does, I'll let you know. Because that's something that I'm going to be watching. In John 14, verse 29, it says, I have told you these things before they happen, so that when they do happen, you will believe. Christ has told us. In God's Word, it is outlined. You know what's coming. And He is telling you. And He has showed you a way to know. I'm thankful that I know. May have taken 50 years. But there are certain things I do know, and I do know where it came from. So when I hear other things that are outside of what's in God's Word, I won't hear it. Because I know it's wrong. I know it's not true. The only thing to hear and believe and trust in is God's Word. Don't go anywhere else. And I had an experience with a false teacher, believe me. Once I left them, I had to relearn. I had to relearn everything about God's Word, to review it, to get that garbage out of my mind. And that was my fault. But I'm thankful God intervened and said, get away from this. And get yourself re-educated. So you got to be very, very careful of that danger out there, because there's going to be more of them. Because what did Christ say in the last day? There'll be many false prophets and teachers, and believe me, they'll come with you at everything. There's one commercial on TV. I mute my TV. It has to do with the rapture. The moment that guy comes on the TV, I mute my TV. I don't want to hear it. Because it's a lie. That's not in God's Word. But there's a lot of people that believe it, don't they? And you have to ask the questions, why are you outside of God's Word? Why don't you understand this? Well, number one, you don't believe God and you don't have His Spirit. That's why you're misled. There's none of that. But I think there's going to be a lot more of that. And of course, you've got that one, Graham's son on there too. And he does a good work. You know, I'll admit that with the Samaritan Purse. He does a lot of good work there. But this prayer he goes through on the TV is wrong. You know, it's that same old thing, accept Christ, you're forgiven, you can go keep on living the way you are. We know that's not true. Because God has a guideline for the way that we are supposed to live. And we live by that word. Keep doing that, and don't let anything deter you from that. And then 2 Timothy 3:2, because I'm finishing up now. It says, for people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God. I see that every day. People are getting so far away from God. You know, they're into their progressivism, their transgenderism, all that garbage, which is totally anti-God. And when a Christian tries to stand up for his values, Christian values, they get scoffed at. Our younger generations don't even have a concept of God, nor will they even accept it. And that's what's happening to this country. You know, there was somewhere in 2 Chronicles, I forget which, where it's talked about, can it be too late? And it was where someone was sent to the temple in Judea. I'm trying to think which one it was. One repented, and the other one didn't, but was inquiring. And God basically told him, it's too late. The judgments are coming. And I look at this country and I see the same thing. Is it too late? I sometimes wonder about that, because what I see going on with the younger generations and within our society, it might be too late. You know, and the things you see happening in this country, is it too late? Makes you wonder. And it continues, disobedient to their parents and ungrateful. Yeah, that's why we have the problems with our youth. They didn't grow up with direction. Most of them are from one-parent families, but they have no values. Nothing's been taught to them. And then I see this report where kids that are raised by conservatives are healthier and mental health, better than they look at the liberal and they say they got a lot of mental problems. Well, what do conservatives do? They teach values. They teach morals. They say go this way. With liberalism, it's progressivism, more or less. Figure it out for yourself. And look what it's led to. Hardships, problems, because a lot of these kids are suffering mental illnesses. They can't grasp what's going on. And it's a sad thing to see, because these are what? Future leaders. Good luck with that. And then in closing, this is one I truly, truly love. It's in Matthew 24, verse 32 and 33. Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you can know his return is very near, right at the door. Observing the times. I know one thing, in my early life, I grew up on a farm, and the whole thing. So I understand, when spring comes, the trees come, like because up north you see that pretty dominantly, because the trees go dormant during the winter. But when spring starts coming around, you see the budding, you see the leaves coming out, and you, like it says, summer is coming. Short sleeve shirts, shorts, and let's have a whole bunch of fun, get the baseball games going again and all that stuff. Well, Christ is saying the same thing here. When you see these things, you can know his return is very near, right at the door. So, observing the times, to be aware and looking for specific things, I find to be a very healthy thing. So like it says, when you see the branches bud, you kind of know those markers that are out there, just how close you are. And for us, and then watching yourself spiritually, because it's going to get tough with the influences and the persecutions like you had in Bangladesh, where these villagers were beaten for their religion. You're going to see more of that. Are you strong enough? Are you going to be strong enough for when the problems hit this country? And probably the first one will be the economy. The reduction of your standard of living. Is that going to be a problem for you? It'll be a hardship, yes. But God says he will get you through it. Stay close to him. Understand what he's telling you, and you will come through it. And that's all I have to say, brethren. Stay with it.